Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention?
This is not just another streaming service. This is unique stories, iconic stars, and a mountain of entertainment.
Trust me.
This is Hollywood kisses, passionate kisses, and deadly kisses. This is A-Games, A-League, A-Listers, and
Aaron. It's pronounced Aaron?
this is Mission Freaking Impossible. This is SpongeBob 7 days, Geordie every day, and Al on any given Sunday.
That's what living is!
This is a return home, a new home, and a catch-up with old friends.
Remember me?
This is everything you've been looking for.
This is as good as it gets.
This is a mountain of entertainment. This is Paramount Plus, and this is our logo.
Hi everyone, Simon Foster here, and welcome to a very special episode of Screen Watching. It's August 11, that's Paramount Plus Day. Australia's latest streaming provider has launched here down under in lockdown cities, all up and down the East Coast and all over Australia. So no one is more qualified to talk about all things televisual, as they say, than my good friend Dan Barrett. How are you, mate?
Not too bad. My doctorate in all things Paramount Plus is going to be beneficial today. My parents said I was wasting my education with a Paramount Plus degree, and yet here we are.
And it's working for us. That's great. That's awesome. I didn't listen to anything my parents said, and hence I've become a 50-year-old podcaster. Okay.
Oh, man. Is this my future?
So it's looking in the mirror, isn't it? And I should say that this is the first time that you and I have done a visual podcast. This is a treat for the internet and all the denizens that inhabit it. So it's good to see your face talking to you.
Look, it is. I actually bought a new laptop a couple of days ago, so I was playing around with my Zoom settings, and I found there's a setting on it which manages to smooth out every single wrinkle in your face.
Yeah.
And so I cranked that thing right up.
Yeah,
so
I
I
know
look
that
like I'm a
setting.
sprightly 20-year-old.
Yes, you do. You look like a 12-year-old girl, and I appreciate that. Well done. Okay, let's talk Paramount Plus. This is a kind of a big deal down here in Australia, and I'm going to come to you for all the information. So, question one, how did we get to this point? What are the origins of Paramount Plus? And yes, we've sort of touched on this in the last couple of podcasts building up to this, but I want you, in 25 words or less, to give us the origins of Paramount Plus.
Well, I'll do this as quickly as possible. So it began with the invention of this thing called the television. Yeah, okay. Taking things a bit more, modern. Basically, what you've got is in the US, you've got CBS, which had this thing called CBS All Access. Basically, CBS, when it got involved in the streaming business, it thought, you know what, there's the Hulus of the world, which has some broadcast content. NBC, you go to NBC.com and stream NBC stuff. But no, we want people to pay for our content.
Sure.
So they launched this thing called CBS All Access. And you might be surprised to find out not many people signed up for it. So they had a couple of originals because they thought, well, we've got to give people something extra if people are going to be paying a few bucks a month for it. So there was a few originals that were greenlit. So shows like The Good Fight, and then a whole bunch of other ones, which mostly people don't really know of that well. But Star Trek Discovery came from this group of shows that were created.
Okay, so they put in the effort a little bit, but the turnout wasn't so great.
Absolutely. Now, because CBS All Access was US based, it meant that some of those shows that they made for it, they were going to overseas third-party broadcasters. So in Australia, SBS have The Good Fight. Netflix ended up buying the rights to Star Trek Discovery. And you've probably noticed that Star Trek Picard has landed on Amazon Plus, and a few of these other bigger marquee shows got sold off internationally to third-party places, but they still had the rights to the shows that no one really wanted, like Give Me a Dollar. Like, how many of your friends are talking about Give Me a Dollar?
I got one friend. Well, he's not a friend anymore, but yeah, okay.
Yeah. So they still had a couple of the shows sort of sitting in the archive. And CBS, they were owned by a company which the plan was to re-merge two companies together. So Viacom and CBS. CBS, traditional broadcaster, Viacom, cable channel. So owned by the same parent company, which is like National Amusements, something or other. Anyway, they finally decided to smush them together. And as part of the smushing together, the intent was to bring their collective libraries together to launch a brand new streaming service. So they took the framework of CBS All Access, like the actual the platform, and they slapped a brand new name on it. They put it and ingested a huge amount of new content into it. So they had all the CBS content, but you've got all this Viacom content. And to explain what Viacom is, these are old brands that you know, like MTV and Comedy Central, Nickelodeon. So traditional cable TV stuff. So they smushed all that together, rebranded it Paramount Plus, pushed it out into the world. One of the things that they've got is Viacom CBS own Channel 10 in Australia. And so
Okay.
as part of the ownership there, we've got the rollout of Paramount Plus going global. So it's in a couple of countries now. It's in the US, obviously. It's in the Nordic countries. It's now in Australia, probably Canada and a couple of other places around as well. And so we're now part of this rollout of it. So when you fire up and you think about the background of it all, it makes sense with what you see on Paramount Plus, which is a whole bunch of US cable stuff. So things that you wouldn't expect to see on a streaming service, like a teen mum or, 16 and pregnant and all those kinds of things. You'll
Sure.
find a lot of that stuff sitting in the library because they own MTV, and MTV just made that stuff in, thousands upon thousands of hours a week of teen mum.
Okay.
So that stuff is all deep in the library, and it's a rich library of stuff that you probably aren't really going to want to press play on.
So if you compare that to some of the other streaming platforms we have at the moment that we get to choose from, or not necessarily here in Australia, but around the world, what's the template? What else is out there that's like that from other producers?
Well, not really. It's kind of an island upon itself. And if you think about all the other streamers, they all model themselves after Netflix. So Netflix were based on the idea of it's customer first and it's stuff that's made for Netflix or stuff that's made for a Netflix audience. And so all these other companies set up with the idea of emulating that Netflix experience. But now we've got this point where these legacy broadcasters are like, well, we've missed the boat, so we need to catch up to like the Netflix style of things. But they're trying to take their existing business models and wrap that around a Netflix type of model. And so you come across now Paramount Plus, which looks and feels quite different to most other streamers because it really is offering different types of content in a way that's more aligned with a broadcast sensibility than it is a on-demand Netflix type of a deal.
Is that reflected in the interface? And by that, I mean, when you get to the site and you look at how you can subscribe and what you get to watch and the options you're given, are they following a template in their design and their aesthetics on their website, or can we expect something different there?
Yeah, so this is the thing. Like if you took all the content that existed on Paramount Plus and applied it to a Netflix model, okay, essentially it would just be a grab bag of things, and you'd see rows saying drama series, series starring people with bananas on their heads.
Sure.
There'd be very specific sort of categories around these things. But when you log into Paramount Plus, it's quite different. Yes, they've got those categories. You can see some comedies. You can see comedies with female lead, that kind of gear going on. But also you'll find there's different boxes on the screen that point to things like MTV and Comedy Central.
Sure.
And so you're expected to know what these brands represent, even if in Australia, we don't really know what some of these brands really are. Like we've heard of Comedy Central. And if you're a Fetch TV subscriber in Australia, you might have seen the linear Comedy Central channel, and you might have recognized the Comedy Central logo appear on things like South Park over the years, but it doesn't really mean anything to us. And yet, as part of this global rollout, we're getting these legacy branded channels that we're supposed to care about, as opposed to stripping all of that away and just pushing the content.
You mentioned there South Park, and they've been in the news lately for signing this huge new deal that'll see a whole lot of movies and content, new stuff come down the pipe. And we've had
not just a huge new deal, $900 million deal with 14 movies, Simon. That's a
not loose
monster
change.
deal.
That's very important. Yeah. So, and we've seen old school properties like The Hills get rejuvenated, and some of the other shows across the networks across the Paramount catalog get rejuvenated. Is that all with this rollout inside the launch in different markets of Paramount Plus?
So keep in mind with Paramount Plus, you can think about it in terms of just Paramount Plus, but think about this in terms of every single major broadcasting company from the US. And when I say broadcasting, I mean over-the-air broadcast as well as various cable companies. They're all looking at the Netflix model. They're all looking at the declining number of people subscribing to their cable channels. And they're all thinking, well, how do we get involved in streaming? So every single one of these companies now are taking their traditional TV broadcasters, and all the things they're commissioning for them is with the idea that it'll eventually live on their on-demand streaming service. And essentially it works as on-demand streaming service is their number one priority. All the existing channels that they have that actually bring in most of their revenue is like number two. So it's all in service of these streaming services. So when they are commissioning a new season of The Hills, it is absolutely with the idea that it'll play on Paramount Plus and then secondary on MTV. And you can even see with the rollouts, like they'll always say that, on day one it's with Paramount Plus, and then there might be a 2-day delay and be screening on like one or two other channels. And there's a lot more of a mix of where shows are landing now, and some shows do land on multiple channels, which is an unusual situation if you looked at a TV guide from 15 years ago.
Yeah, true. We've been talking primarily TV here. What are some of the big properties that we can expect? I'm putting you on the spot here, I know, but obviously SpongeBob SquarePants is in the mix. It's one of the big money spinners, the cash cows for the Paramount people.
So I'm going to talk about this broadly in a global sense and not necessarily in an Australian Paramount Plus sense.
Okay.
And we'll get to why in a moment. Like you'll get this entirely in a sec. But when they promote things like Paramount Plus, you're going to see kid shows from Nickelodeon being doubled down on heavily, because the secret with streaming services is that they want kids' content. If you get a kid who loves a show on their streaming service, the thing that you can't do as a parent is cancel that service, because then you've got a kid who cries at you.
Yeah,
and so you're perfectly happy to spend $9 a month so you don't have to deal with that. So front and center, Paramount Plus, you've got SpongeBob SquarePants. So Camp Coral is an original series that'll be playing around the place. But then you're seeing other familiar things. So like iCarly is back for another series, which is targeting not the kids that were, obviously the kids who were watching it back in the day and now in their 20s. So it's a nostalgia push for them, as well as trying to get some of the young kids who might still want to watch the older iCarly 20-somethings now.
I think Rugrats is back.
Rugrats is back with a brand new show, and it's computer animated now, and it looks weird and creepy.
Yep.
You've also got Star Trek is a very big marquee property that if you go to the US, you will find that Paramount Plus is all about Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Lower Decks. All three of those appearing on different streaming services in Australia. They've got a brand new one coming soon called Star Trek New... what's the thing called when you get Star Trek? It's about going on new voyages,
new journeys, new frontiers.
New Frontiers. I can't remember what they actually call it.
I can't remember either.
Could be called Brave New Frontier. I'm not sure. But it's a spin-off with Captain Pre-Kirk Pike.
Yes.
And the Enterprise crew. And so that's going to be launching in the not too distant future. I think they've filmed it all now. It's just a lot of post-production on a show like that. So that show will probably launch on Paramount Plus. But the weird thing with the Paramount Plus in Australia is, go onto it, there's almost no Star Trek to be found whatsoever. I understand with those new ones that they're not going to put it on there because there's already a content agreement where Picard's over on Amazon, Lower Decks I think is Amazon as well, and as I said, Discovery is over on Netflix. They can't do anything there, but they've got old classic Star Trek. You've got the old movies, you've got...
Yeah, I did notice, and I was going to mention this. There's none of the early Star Trek movies in their catalog. I'll get to that a little bit later on.
Yeah. I can't imagine that that's tied up with exclusive deals either. So it could just be that on day one they chose not to do that, and you might see that in a month or two, and it'll appear on service. We are talking right now about day one Paramount Plus experience.
Some big names in across the TV lineup as well, with the Comedy Central label, and I am just scrolling up and down here. You've got your Amy Schumers, you've got your Key and Peele, you've got Dave Chappelle's show getting another run. Nick Kroll in there, very funny guy, Tosh.0. So they've got some big names that have worked the Comedy Central angle as well.
Yeah, so I mean, Comedy Central is one of the big brands that they're pushing. And again, it's that weird thing of, why do we even care that they were Comedy Central shows? They should just be Paramount Plus shows. But Here we are, we're talking about Comedy Central. And so it just gets muddled and it's a bit weird. So you can't even talk about Paramount Plus without me having to go through the background as to, well, it started as CBS All Access and it was a cable origin. And like, you shouldn't need to do that. You should just be able to say that Viacom, CBS are launching a new streaming service, pulling together a whole bunch of their shows. Like, that should be the clean story, but it's not. And so that's kind of a bit weird about this as a launch.
How much are they asking new punters to pay for all this old stuff?
Okay, so in Australia, it's actually a pretty good deal. So it's $8.99 a month, ad-free.
Right.
Now, there's a very strong point of difference between what we get in Australia to what you get in the US. In the US, there is a cheaper price point, but it comes with ads. Okay, so I think it might be $5.99 with ads and $10.99 without ads.
Okay.
But we actually have a different content offer in Australia. So we actually get probably a better Paramount Plus experience than they get in the US, even though the US do have a few extra shows. They have those Star Trek shows, but you have to think about this a little bit with the idea that this will all sort of come out in a wash over the next year or two. And some of these content deals that you care about with some of the stuff that's on Paramount Plus in the US that isn't here, that'll probably change and it'll start having great sort of parity in terms of what we're seeing licensed wherever. So take that idea of it out of the equation. The additional thing that we get in Australia is one of the brands that they have as part of the Viacom CBS family of channels is Showtime. Showtime's a cable channel in the US, kind of like HBO. The quality's not quite at HBO level, but if you think about HBO minus 25%, you probably get like the feeling of Showtime. Okay. And in Australia, we got all the Showtime series on Stan. So probably the highest profile one is Billions from the last couple of years.
Yeah, you've mentioned that one. Yeah. So what's going to happen with this?
So Billions will stay on Stan,
Yes.
but all the other Showtime series are coming to Paramount Plus. So if you were watching a lot of these high-end premium dramas on Stan in Australia, you're going to find not those shows specifically because they might still be tied up with Stan, but all the new buzzy shows they've got, the limited series, that'll all come over now to Paramount Plus. So we get that as part of this $8.99 deal. So that's actually a pretty good deal comparatively.
I want to ask something quickly here. I'm hanging out for J.J. Abrams' take on UFO, which launches on Showtime, I think, this week over in the US.
A couple of days ago. Yeah.
A couple of days ago. So we're not running concurrent release schedules. That would suggest there's not a lot of day and date if I haven't seen it pop up in my Paramount Plus subscription.
Okay, you're kind of falling a little bit into the trap that a lot of people do when they hear that something's a HBO Max show or a Paramount Plus show. You never quite look at the service that is streaming it as much as who the distributor is. Right. Okay, so I know that J.J. Abrams has a deal with Warner Brothers or Warner Media. And so it could well be that he's made that show with Warner Media and they've sold it to Paramount Plus. And when they sold it to Paramount Plus, it might have just been for the US territory. And they may not necessarily have had other territories in mind when that deal was made. Gotcha. It could well be that if that show was sold 6 months from now, they'd be much more concerned about Australia as part of that deal. And so that might get written into the contract then if that was to happen in the future. So like, it's just one of these things where you have to think that just because it's on Paramount Plus in the US and is a brand new thing for Paramount Plus, doesn't necessarily mean we'll get it here. But you are going to find this sort of confusion over shows will start shifting and changing in the next couple of years as we start reaching that sort of global parity. It'll be a lot more like the Netflix experience where it's pretty rare to get a show on Netflix that's being produced for Netflix that isn't just a global release.
So we're looking at $8.99 a month, or I should point out $90 a year, which comes down to $7.49 a month if you buy the annual plan.
Yeah, they do give you a, 20% off, I think.
It comes at about 15 or 16% if I remember looking at it this morning. So that's not too bad. So we've touched on some of the titles in the catalogue. Give me your perspective on, and we'll come back to me for the film stuff a little bit later, but give me your perspective on the television catalogue and how it rates.
Okay, so the television catalogue, as I said, you got that Showtime stuff, which I think that's a pretty good deal. The Paramount Plus originals, I think, have been a little bit patchy when it was the CBS All Access originals. I think they're kind of getting their ducks in a row a little bit better now. And one of the things, and this is corporate synergies taking place, I was talking about the Showtime deal, but if you look at what they're doing in Showtime in the US, some of the really good Showtime series they were developing are now being pushed across in their corporate partnership over to being Paramount Plus originals. So we're not going to notice the difference there. It's all going to end up in a funnel just coming to us in the same way. So if we're thinking about the shows that are launching right now, some of the big buzzy titles, I would say where Paramount Plus really falls apart is that none of the titles they've announced as these are the brand new shows for you to watch right now are particularly that good for the 11th of August, 2021. Okay. One of the things I'm looking forward to is that they've retrofitted their show Evil, which was a CBS broadcast show, and are now making that for Paramount Plus. It's been running for a couple of weeks as season 2 on Paramount Plus in the US.
Terrific show, love it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of this show, but for some reason it's not a day one show. And I don't really quite understand why, but season 2 is coming soon to Paramount Plus. So I don't quite understand what's going on there exactly. And so there's frustrations like that I have on day one. Another frustration I have, one of the real sort of great things about Paramount Plus in the US is they've got this archive of old classic sitcoms and drama series from yesteryear that are just sitting there in the library. These are shows like Happy Days and The Brady Bunch, Mission Impossible, The Love Boat, The Old School Perry Mason, Taxi, Wings, Gunsmoke, The Odd Couple.
Oh my God.
Shows like that. And look, I'm not saying that there's going to be a whole bunch of people running to watch those programs, but if they're sitting there in the library, look, I've got a sneaky Paramount Plus US subscription that I've had for like a year now. Well, since Paramount Plus launched, but prior to that, CBS All Access for a few years.
Sure.
One of the things I do enjoy doing is falling asleep at night watching an old episode of Mission Impossible. Like, it doesn't matter if I don't see the end of it because it's just like a 60s episode of Mission Impossible. And whatever. But still, it brings me joy.
And wasn't that one of the great strategies early on in sort of when cable TV came around, was the whole Nick at Night experience? That became the thing to do. So it would sort of mirror that.
I mean, a little bit. So one of the things that hasn't really been tested that much is the idea of using this older library catalogs to drive viewership. So it's always about the buzzy new things, and it's not about these old classics. It's almost as though they're afraid to push out Mission Impossible as something that a young kid might want to watch these days.
Yeah.
But the thing is that it shouldn't even be an appeal to the youth. Like, streaming services are now so ubiquitous. There's a lot of older people that I think that if you said, hey, look, you've got the streaming service of these new shows, but also these old favorites that you haven't watched for 20, 30 years, here's an opportunity to sit back and watch an episode of Gunsmoke. Like, that's actually pretty appealing.
Wouldn't that, I can imagine some marketing team saying, okay, let's go with the launch lineup of 2, 4, 6 drop downs, 2, 4, 6 catalogs to look at. And then in a few months, let's do a legacy channel or something that has all these great old content on it as a second wave to get the second wave of subscribers through.
Oh, look, I would be very surprised if some of those titles I mentioned now don't make their way onto the local service. It just sort of seems that they're just such cheap, old, like retro content that why not just throw it out on day one and excite people who might be looking for an alternative to just these new shows that they're not really that familiar with? Because what you have now is a whole bunch of 16 and pregnants that you don't really have Happy Days with the Brady Bunch. Like, it's just lots of old, dodgy looking reality shows, but no old, dodgy looking sitcoms. And so there just seems to be like, it's got a lack of balance. Just going to more to your question. So I wrote down a list of the couple of titles in the library that I thought were kind of cool.
Yep.
So I'm going to do this really quickly. If you're a fan of South Park, you got 23 seasons of that show streaming at your leisure here. Later this year, there'll be a South Park movie that drops, and that's being made exclusively for Paramount Plus. That's pretty exciting. What you won't find in that South Park collection are the controversial banned episodes that they've stopped pulling from overseas streaming services. You won't find the episode Super Best Friends. You won't find Cartoon Wars Part 1 and 2. You won't find the episodes called 200 and 201. Like, those will not be part of the service. But every other South Park episode you want to watch, I'm pretty sure you'll find there. One of my all-time favorite shows, Cheers. You got every episode of the show streaming, so that's a big plus. If you've never watched Cheers, it still holds up really, really well today, with the occasional episode that feels a little bit politically incorrect. But by and large, it's still a very contemporary feeling show. Detroiters. Detroiters is this great Comedy Central show that ran for 2 seasons. One of my all-time favorites. It's got Sam Richardson in it and Tim Robinson. Tim Robinson's one of the biggest comedy guys in the world right now. Thanks to his Netflix show, I Think You Should Leave. So if you've been enjoying that show, you need to check out Detroiters, because that is absolutely, it's the DNA for I Think You Should Leave is all in Detroiters. It's a really funny, just fantastic little show. The Good Fight, you don't have the newest episodes. They're going to be on SBS in Australia. So the 5th season's currently streaming, but the first 4 seasons are streaming now on Paramount Plus. You got Evil, so season 1 streaming now, and season 2 is hopefully not too far away. Let's say you like NCIS, and I don't, but lots of people do. And there's 18 seasons, which is the entire library of NCIS, available to stream now, which I think is kind of nifty. One of the sort of good retro picks in there is maybe Beverly Hills 90210, which is very enjoyable to watch now as someone who grew up with that as a 10-year-old. You've got that. And also, if you wanted to follow it through, you could also watch the reboot 90210 show, or the reboot of the reboot of the reboot, which was BH 90210, which brought back all the actors from the original playing themselves in a fictional thing. And that was trash. But Beverly Hills 90210, you could watch that. Or Melrose Place, that's there as well. Some HBO library stuff is in there as well. So they've got to deal with Warner Brothers to bring in a few shows and movies from the Warner's catalog.
Right.
So you've got Oz and Deadwood streaming as part of the
That's quality. Here. That's quality.
Those are 2 great titles. If you want to watch pretty much every Twilight Zone ever made, they've got the entire original series from 1959, which ran for about like 5 or 6 seasons. You've got the 1985 couple of seasons, and then the 2019 couple of seasons. What else have we got there? Something which I was really disappointed by, and these are 2 very cheap titles that are sitting in that US library that we didn't get here. Eon Flux, which,
early
Eon Flux,
MTV, early MTV. That was one of the groundbreaking sort of animated shows on MTV that was made into a terrible film.
Oh man, is that show terrible? But it is a weird, wild TV show, and like, it can't cost anything at all to have it as part of the service here, but it's not there for some reason. Disappointing. And similarly, another show, which both of these are MTV shows and not Comedy Central shows, which is a bit weird. But have you ever seen Wondershausen?
No.
if you are a fan of very weird, strange comedy, often involving puppets, I think Wundershausen is very much in your bag. So Wundershausen is basically, it's not quite Sesame Street. It's probably more like the Electric Company, but it's kind of a mixture of puppets and little animated sequences and kids on the street, like talking to adults about grown-up things, like little short films. Like it's kind of made to feel like one of those shows from the 70s or 80s, but very much a contemporary comedy mindset. Look it up on YouTube. It is probably the funniest TV show I've seen in the last 20 years. And it's like this complete gem, which could make its way onto the catalog. And it could be something that I could be trumpeting saying, check out this show, it's amazing. But instead I'm here saying, you can't see this show, it's amazing. And that's not the story you want to tell here.
They have
I'm going to intrude on two things that's going to be in the film category here that I'm very excited by, but they're really TV things. It's because of that Warner Brothers deal. They've got Daffy Duck, Fantastic Ireland, and Daffy Duck Quackbusters, which were, if people remember, in the, I'm going to say mid-80s, they did these compilations of Warner Brothers classic Looney Tunes cartoons and had like some new animation and just like cheap sort of frameworks to play old clips in. Like it's just a clip show, but man, are they entertaining. And I don't know Quackbusters at all, but I've got very fond memories of Fantastic Ireland. So I'm very excited to see that in there.
Can you tell us anything about Why Women Kill? They've launched that as their sort of premiere episodic television offering. Jennifer Goodwin, who else is in there? Lucy Liu, I think, from memory.
Yeah, so the show is from Mark Cherry, who cut his teeth on the Golden Girls. This is the question without notice.
Yeah, sorry.
Cut his teeth on the Golden Girls and also went on to make Desperate Housewives.
Yes, he did, yeah.
Basically, he was sort of pottering around and people were wondering what his next show would be. He did this thing called Why Women Kill. It launched originally, I think, as a CBS All Access show. Right. It kind of came and went. No one really cared about it. Same with the second season. In Australia, SBS had the rights to the show, but you know, I don't think anyone's really talking about it. No. I've seen the first maybe 2 episodes and it's fine.
All right, so shall I weigh in on some of the films in the film catalogue just to see where we sit with the Paramount Library of Films, which has been for a long time arguably my favourite studio. I'm a sucker for Warner Brothers as well, having done a bit of time in the trenches with them. But having cast an eye over the film catalogue, they certainly represent themselves fairly well with the key Paramount franchises. Mission Impossible, Indiana Jones, The Godfather, the Transformers films, they're all in there. And as you point out, their deal with Warner Brothers mean they've got the bulk of the Harry Potters, the Batmans. I'm not quite sure where the Nightmare on Elm Street came from. That would have been a pickup, I think, because they were outside of Warner's when they first came out. They've got 1 to 5 of the Elm Street films, as well as the 2010 reboot.
Is Nightmare on Elm Street now part of like the New Line library, maybe? Which is
I think it is, yeah.
Media?
Yeah, I think that's exactly why it's worked its way over there. So it's good to see some Australian titles in there. Not a lot, but Beneath Hill 60, Ride Like a Girl, Mad Max 2 is certainly in there, which would have been a Warner Brothers pickup. As has often been the case with a lot of the new streamers, there's going to be a little bit of a kickback that there's not a lot of classics amongst this launch lineup. They've got Barbarella, Blue Hawaii, Funny Face, the Audrey Hepburn film. They're all fairly Paramount standards that turn up when new medias are launched. I remember the fuss that was made when they came to DVD, and then when they came to VHS, then DVD, and so on and so forth. So they always seem to be around, but there's no real deep dive into the classics catalogue as yet. There are some odd sort of left field ones in there that look like some kind of independent pickup or some arrangement that has been made to pick up a catalogue that may be attached to Warner's. Things like Luke Perry in 8 Seconds, the So Bad It's Good classic Mummy Dearest with Faye Dunaway playing Joan Crawford. There's a terrific Goldie Hawn film in there called Swing Shift, which is an early Jonathan Demme film, which hasn't been around for a long time. The forgotten Oscar winner, The Accidental Tourist with Gina Davis. Also in there, you've got this odd little film called Town and Country, which is a Warren Beatty, Diane Keaton film. Barely got any sort of release, was stuck in post-production hell for years, cost New Line a fortune, but it's showing up in the catalogue of titles as well. So yeah, for a launch catalogue, it's not a bad lineup, and there's certainly stuff there that I want to tune into pretty quickly that I haven't seen for a long time. As I mentioned, there's some pre-1980 stuff. Well, I won't even get into the list of stuff that's not even available that is classic Paramount, things like Rosemary's Baby and Love Story and Saturday Night Fever and Airplane. They're certainly sitting on all their 80s hits for now. The Oscar biggies from the early 90s, like Ordinary People and Reds and Terms of Endearment, they're not getting the light of day. The John Hughes films, Pretty in Pink, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Some Kind of Wonderful, they're not there. And when you get to the 90s, you do start to see more of a sort of a flow of titles come through their catalogue. But there's certainly a lot to pick from the fantastic Paramount range. So I'm pretty happy with the launch films. We are about to get to the big sort of launch title, the one that's having its premiere on Paramount Plus, that skips cinemas. But we'll get to that in a minute. But casting an eye over the film catalogue, Dan, was there anything that stood out for you or didn't stand out?
What's really weird is the films I got excited by are pretty much all the films that you just listed then. Like, I don't know what it was about those titles.
Diversity in podcasting. That's what we are, yes.
Very much so. But one of the things that I thought was really sort of quirky was that you had a couple of like well-known film series which were missing key components of the films. So for example, I don't know how someone's going to be able to watch Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, or Austin Powers in Goldmember without having seen Austin Powers. Like, it's sort of weird not to have the first film in the 3-film series.
Also,
and then similarly, like Final Destination. What about Final Destination 2? I've enjoyed those. Maybe I'd like to watch 3 and 4, but no, I just have to jump straight to Final Destination 5, which I don't think is even a final destination. I think there's a further destination to go.
There's got further to travel. There's more destinations. So yeah, you're right. There are some odd ones in there. Clearly, that's some kind of rights issue or back catalog issue. So I don't know if they'll ever smooth that out, but I was pretty happy with the catalog deal, I've got to say. For $8.99 a month, it'll be exactly the sort of rummaging through the back shelf at the video store experience that I think that the titles offer.
Okay, so Simon, in the spirit of the Paramount Plus original series, The Good Fight, let's get all Judge Wagner here and offer our final verdict. Would we subscribe to this service? So Simon, I'll let you go first.
You know, and something we haven't touched on, and maybe we should touch on at some point, is what should we get rid of if we get Paramount Plus, and maybe we can look at that at some other point. There seems to be a lot of content here that I'm already seeing on other channels, and both you and I have got very extensive screening options. We are screen watchers after all, and we've sort of set ourselves up. So Paramount Plus might be coming a little bit late in the game. I have it, and I'm going to explore it for the first 7 days of my free trial to see if I want to keep it. But for $9 a month, or if you go all out and get the yearly subscription, which works out at $7.50 a month, you know, I'd say probably yes. I think there's a lot of good stuff on there that's going to come your way if you look hard for it. So I'd say give it a go.
Big shout out to our YouTube viewers who may have just seen me throw a pillow at my dogs who were fighting over a teddy bear in the background.
Or my phone that just went off from someone which I thought I turned off. So live podcasting.
Indeed. So looking at this, $8.99, my thoughts are that on day one, the catalog by and large is, I don't want to use the word disappointing because it's not really quite that, but it kind of feels like there's no heat or energy around any of it. The things I'd be very excited to see either are coming in the next month or two, or it just doesn't look like they're turning up at all. Like, I don't know, like there's nothing I could actively say, you have to check this out. But if you just subscribe for 1 or 2 months with the library catalog as it exists today, I think you'd be quite happy and you'd feel like you got your $9 worth. But would you want to subscribe in month 3, 4, and going forward based off what you've got here as a static catalog? I'm not too sure. I do think we're going to see a lot of titles added to this, and it's going to be a bit more enthusiasm around the series launches. It just seems weird for day one to not really have even like 2 or 3 buzzy titles that we can really talk about. And their buzziest title is what you're going to do a review of in just a moment. And we're talking about a movie starring Mark Wahlberg that when it got released in the US in mid-June, like the Rotten Tomatoes score for it sitting at like 35%. I think the audience rating's even lower. Like, that's not an exciting title. It's missing from a lot of their marketing materials as well. So they're clearly not really pushing it that hard. So I don't know. The marketing's not getting me excited. The library itself isn't really getting me that excited. There's a bunch of movies there. I kind of feel that if I spent my $9, I won't feel burned by the experience, but I'm probably not telling my friends to subscribe either. So right now, you know, my judgment is it's worth the $9-ish.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree with that as well. I think and I'm keen to see how they market their greater catalogue and their broader back catalogue stuff and their classics going forward. That's going to be an important part to me. See if they step up and really honor the legacy and the history of the studio, or if this is just a grab for cash going forward.
So Simon,
yeah,
we've now done the fun.
Great. I finally get to talk and your dog starts barking. That's just great.
Okay, we've done the final verdicts. It's time now to really take a look at the film that, look, the world can't stop talking about. Mark Wahlberg in Infinite. Is this an Antoine Fuqua film?
It is an Antoine Fuqua film. They've worked together before in Infinite. Now, I've got to say, I went and got my free 7-day subscription just so I could do this review for the big new Paramount title. So everyone sit down, shut up and listen to what I have to say. Mark Wahlberg plays a jittery schizophrenic who can't get hired in the competitive world of high-class maitre d' because he once beat up a customer. Now, Marky Mark once beat someone up too, but Hollywood is far more forgiving of such sins once you've established some box office clout. His latest, I guess, arse-backward action romp is all about past lives catching up with you, which is really the last thing Wahlberg needs to happen. Marky Mark plays the latest incarnation of the mightiest warrior of a group of infinites called the Believers, eternal do-gooders who are fighting other infinites called the Nihilists. Now, as the name suggests, the Nihilists want to destroy the world using a mass extinction device called the Egg. The Believers, Natch, don't want that to happen. Now, Marky Mark doesn't know he's lived many lives before, despite knowing how to build a sword like an ancient Japanese craftsman. He's lived a life filled with voices in his head telling him stuff he doesn't know how he knows. That's what schizophrenia is, he yells at one point, which I don't think is entirely true, but works well enough for this stupid story. Infinite may not be Hollywood's finest hour in its depiction of mental health issues, it must be said. Under Fuqua's very dated action directing, Infinite is a ticking clock chase film wrapped up as a fantasy rehash of ideas done much better in The Matrix and Inception and Memento. As the bad guy Bathurst, head of the Nihilists, Chiwetel Ejiofor, is more awful than he's ever been. And he was in Love Actually. And Sophie Cookson, as the spunky offsider, deserves better. Dylan O'Brien barely gets a look in. His role was clearly butchered in post. Now, to the point you made at the start, it's understandable that Paramount Plus would launch with this clunky, grinding film. At a glance, it looks like a big screen blockbuster. But it's also a bit odd that Paramount Pictures would launch with this title. I can't believe they'd open up with the worst film they have on their books, but what are they hiding that's worse than this? Very strange setup. So Infinite is not why you're going to spend your $9 on Paramount Plus this month, trust me.
So just on that note, one of the things to keep in mind is that we've got a skewed experience here where we've kind of got like this sort of mirror universe version of Paramount Plus in the US. So in the US, yes, they did have Infinite, but they were also able to recently drop A Quiet Place Part 2 on the platform as well. So it's not like all their eggs are in the Infinite basket.
Sure.
Yeah, so, but we don't have A Quiet Place Part 2, so we're just going to get like a crappy content offering with this film that no one's really going to watch, or at least not going to see through to the end. Like, I presume you did because you're a reviewer with integrity, but yeah. I would imagine that most people sitting on the couch probably aren't going to make it through to the closing credits of this one.
It's such... You know, people say they don't make movies like they used to. And in terms of Infinite, they sort of do. This was kind of like Swordfish. Remember that crappy old Hugh Jackman thing where you got to see Halle Berry's boobs? That was kind of the high point of that movie in every way. And it was just such a clunky, terrible film. And this
it's really sad,
a lot like that.
It's sad you speak so poorly of that film, considering that's the film that taught me how to hack computers.
Oh, was it really? That and Sandra Bullock's The Net. Okay. All right, so that's the Paramount Plus very special episode of Screen Watching. Any final words, Dan Barrett?
No.
Off to the television. Let's get our $9 worth.
I feel a little bit broken by it just because I honestly would like to tell a good story about Paramount Plus because it does have a lot of things that I enjoy from television. It's just the Australian Paramount Plus experience on day one just isn't there. So I can't talk up the things that I'm actually really passionate about. I'd love to be able to talk up The Good Fight, but that's on SBS, so it doesn't become a Paramount Plus story. I'd like to talk about Evil Season 2, one of my all-time favorite shows like of the last couple of years, but I can't because Season 2 is not there and I don't know when it's coming and they haven't really given me that information. Robert and Michelle King, who create The Good Fight and the aforementioned Evil, they've got a new show which is going to be exclusive to Paramount Plus. I've never been able to see it. I was very excited to watch it this week. I don't know when it's going to drop. There's no advice. Like
God knows, I'd have given anything to sit here and just rattle off quotes from Ferris Bueller. Don't worry, I would have done that, and I will at some point. But it's not on Paramount Plus, so it's back to my VHS copy of the film to check it out.
That's it. So the show I was talking about just then, it's a show called The Bite. And then the other thing is that I use Paramount Plus for watching Stephen Colbert. So I'm a huge fan of Colbert. I like watching The Late Show. And usually I watch the monologue and then I'll just turn it off when the guests start. But like I usually watch it for about half an hour every night. And I got that explicitly for the point that Channel 10 have traditionally not played Colbert at a reasonable time. They've always buried it at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
And like when you want to watch it on catch up, you usually had to wait for the next morning after it had been played at 2 a.m. to trigger their online catch up to be able to watch it. That's a really crappy experience for a show that they owned outright. But my understanding is that it's going to drop along like in the same time frame as the US will drop it onto Paramount Plus. So I'm about 2.5 hours away from checking to see if at least I'll get that from the service. But
enjoy your evening, Dan Barrett. Here
Yeah,
we
so-
are in lockdown. Stay healthy, mate. It's been a joy talking to you video wise. What can we expect this week on screen watching?
Absolutely. On screen watching this week, we will talk about the TV shows and movies that we've talked about reviewing, none of which I remember right now.
You haven't got any idea, do you? Neither do I, quite frankly, but that's okay. We'll make something up.
No, but one of the things that we're not going to talk about,
Yes.
one of the things I want to give a recommendation to is there's a film dropping on Netflix this coming Friday.
Right.
We haven't made space for it in a rundown, and we're not going to other than a cursory mention, but it's a film called Beckett. It stars as a John David Washington.
Yes, it is. And Alicia Vikander.
Yes. And a couple of other faces that you will know. Vicky Cripps, who we just saw in Old a couple of weeks ago.
Yep. Vikander.
She's in there as well. A bit more of a prominent role than Ms. Vikander has. But the film's had middling reviews around the place. I watched it last night. I really enjoyed it. Like, it's a very quiet action film, but it ticked a lot of boxes for me. But we'll talk about that on the podcast.
I definitely should. I've heard great things about it. So let's do that. Dan Barrett, thank you so much for being part of the very special episode, Paramount Plus launch episode of Screen Watching. We'll talk soon, mate.
Indeed.